Shalom, shalom, good people. This is to be an appendix, what we are doing now, to that program that was shown to you about the history of Davvenology and how I got to certain things. And here I need to expand on some ideas and some issues that I left hanging last time, and I said I'd get to it around, so somebody gave me around to it. And now I got around to it, and I can get around to it. So here's where we go. The issue of Hitbonenut, the people who were good at Hitbonenut were those who were able to practice staying on course with what in Catholic parlance is called discursive meditation. That's to say, you still use images and words in your mind, and you keep track as you're going. So if you're doing, for instance, as in Gate to the Heart, you're doing one of the meditations that has to do with Memorabilia, then you want to stay on that. And the longer you stay on that, and not only with the intellectual mind tossing concepts around, but actually visualizing them and feeling yourself in them. There is a concept that's very, very important. It's not only a concept, it's an experience. And that's called participatory epistemology, or like I like to speak about as adata de nafshe, or as Professor Heschel would speak about it, he would call it situational thinking. That's to say, that what you are thinking about, let's say in Memorabilia, then you are not only thinking about what fills all the worlds, but even there you go in great detail and you check out what it's like to fill this planet. Oceans, mountains, people, cells, whales, guppies, everything. And all this is filled by divine life, and most of the time people stop there and they don't make the next step to say, and I too am filled by divine light. And now I'm paying attention to that, and I'm going inside of myself and greeting God in my fingers and in my toes and in my belly and in my heart. And when I am doing this, I'm participating. This is what I found was not quite correct, and the controversy was going on between Scholem and Buber. Scholem said, you want to understand a Hasidic master, you go and see what he wrote or what's been written that he said. And Buber said, that's not enough. You have to read this, you have to see the stories, you have to understand the story, hear the stories really, read the stories. When you do that, you have an idea. And I kept on saying, that's not enough. You need to have two more things. You need to have the nigunim of that master, and you need to also have the nusach, the way in which he was davening, his type of davening. And for this reason, if you have seen the DVD that has the various rebbes in it, that'll help you understand what I mean. But besides Buber saying I, thou, and I, it, and Gershom Scholem being the one that I characterized once as the behavioristic historian of the Kabbalah, he's very good for what he's good at. You can learn anatomy very well by doing a cadaver, but it wasn't quite alive in him, except as when he went to the Eranos conferences in Switzerland, and then he could talk about it as archetypes, but about that's all that there was. Anyway, Professor Heschel once asked me, and what do you understand about my thought? And I told him. Started out, Buber says, and he says, don't tell me about Buber. I said, no, this is important. Buber speaks about I, it, which deals with the world as object. Then he speaks about I, thou, two subjects talking to one another. I'm a center of my personality, you're a center of your personality, and there is meeting, and he speaks about this I-thou meeting. And then I said to Professor Heschel, but you talk about the he-me relationship. in which He, meaning God, is the center, and I am the divine object. I'm being created. And most of the time we don't flip our minds into that sense. And that's what Shiviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid is about, to constantly see yourself not only in the divine presence, but also being created. HaMechadesh betuvo bechol yom tamid maaseh bereshit. Elohai neshama shenatata bi, with every breath you recreate me, you give me neshama, neshima all over again. And so that's a very important thing to be able to follow that through. So the meditation in which you want to keep track is to stay with that for a while. One way, of course, would be to try and see if you closed your eyes and tuned out, could you do the whole Amida now in your head? In a way that as you say the words in your head, Baruch Atah Ya Elokeinu Elokei Horenu Elokei Avraham v'Sarah, and at that point you look down the track of history, your two parents, your four great parents, and so on and so forth, until it comes back again to Abraham and Sarah. And you see that connection, and you see that amazing moment, how you're being created and delegated and deployed by generations and generations to be in your own here and now, and recognizing how these generations have been protected. You say, Baruch Atah Ya Magen Avraham Upoked Sarah. You get now a whole other sense as you follow through. Now, don't stop at that point, and then continue. And feeling yourself being brought to life again. And Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed. And as you say these words and you keep on track, you watch the whole universe in which there is the happening of Somech Novlim, Rofei Cholim, Matir Asurim, and then thinking even about the people who have gone beyond, and that someday you too will be going, and nevertheless He will be the one who keeps faith with those who sleep in the dust. And as you were saying in the Elohai Neshama Vata Mishamar Bekirbi Vata Atid Litla Mimenu Ulachzirabi, and you come back to the word Baruch Atah Hashem B'chaya Metim. Now you see, I've been keeping on track with the Amida being my sort of the track on which the train is running, but I'm also looking out through the side windows to see what I see in the environment that I'm traveling through as I'm saying these words. And I come to Atah Kadosh, V'Shimcha Kadosh, and then I realize Ukedoshim B'chol Yom Ya'alelu Chasela, and I take a look, what is it like to be B'chol Yom, every day in the moment of being Kadosh. And these are very important ways of continuing. So if you can handle doing the Amida this way, then you're free, first of all. You may find yourself at some kind of a meeting and it's time for davening mincha, and at that point, while you may not give any outward signs, here you're going through the whole thing. Now when you can manage that and steer your mind as you would steer an automobile to where you want it to go, rather than it taking you on a ride with whatever arises in you, that's a very important thing, to be able to do that. And that's one of the good preparations for Hitbonenut. Now, what is the content for Hitbonenut that's Jewish content? Now, you take a look how many times the Torah tells us, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, Lekadsho Zachor et Asher Asa Lecha Amalek, Zachor et Yom Tzeitcha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Zachor Yom Shamadata V'Hal Har Sinai. All these are these great remembrances. I would want to say that if I want to do anything in my life, if I could calibrate myself in the right way, that would help me a lot. Give you an example. Right now we are making a video. At times they do a check, a white check, to see whether the color balance is right, and they do all kinds of things. And Michael, God bless him, who is doing this videotaping, is monitoring to see that everything is right. And before he was saying he found there wasn't something wasn't quite right, and so we started all over again because he was checking the calibration. Now, if I were to say what is the sane calibration for a committed Jew, then I would get to the calibration of remembering I'm not in Mitzrayim, God took me out. There will be a Shabbos this week. I remember that deep down I am hooked into the archetype of standing at Sinai, and it's not over yet. It's happening right now. I will remember as I talk on the telephone, I even talk to you, not to speak Lashon Hara because I have to remember what God has done to Miriam. Do you understand? When you have those moments that are the ways to recalibrate, to find out, am I in the right situation? Is my mind set the right way? Yes, Sinai. Yes, out of Mitzrayim. Yes, free at this moment. Yes, in the presence of God. Yes, all these things. Now that's the content that one has to establish, which in some systems, like in the system of Ignatius of Loyola, who has his exercises, spiritual exercises, what he is doing is saying there's a meditation of place. Who are you now in the presence of God? So talis, tefillin, is one way of going like this and saying, yes, I'm here, Touching a mezuzah is that way. But if I don't have any external things, what do I touch? I touch the 6 zichirot, or as there are many more. And if you have the time, in the back of Kedushas Levi, you can read about the zichirot, the teachings that he has. Next, there is an element of a yadata hayom ve'ashavota levavecha. Conceptual truth and factic truth is not quite the same as noetic truth. Let me spell that out. Conceptual truth is when I figure out something and it is coherent and it doesn't have internal contradictions and so on and so forth. I say it must be true. Then there is factual truth. I touch it, I see it, all my senses, and I talk to other people, so we have consensual validation that this is a fact. Okay? But there is an element when a truth dawns on us. That's not the same as a fact. It's not the same as an idea. Look, when I'm doing my spiritual eldering work, I keep telling the people, you know what? You have to come to terms with your mortality. Otherwise, you can't do this work. So here I'm on the gurney. I'm being led into the operating room. And I remember I have to come to terms with my mortality. But you know what? I was coming to terms with dying. There is a difference. Mortality was a concept. Dying was now that noetic reality. It dawned on me that this might possibly be the end, and who knows. Do you get the sense of what I mean by that? That's ata hareta la da'at. That's how da'at comes in. That's how I know. That's how I know. And Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid goes on the outside and on the inside. On the outside, in front of a candle, and there is the Shiviti, the Yud He Vav He. And on the inside, Shiviti, my head is the Yud, my shoulders and arms are the He, my trunk is a Vav, my pelvis and legs is the other He, Shiviti Hashem. And then I can say not just lenegdi, but betochachi, in my very innermost. And the other part that's so important, this is really crazy. I'm talking to a machine now, and you're not really there. But what am I doing? I'm doing a shiviti. I'm saying, but the people who will see it, to them I am talking right now. It is you that I'm talking to, and I put myself in your presence. And now it's not just that I'm talking to the wall. They're real people that I see there. I see you or Marsh. I see some of the Talmidim there. And I'm delighted to be able to see you, though I can't see you. So that's the way in which we have to place ourselves in the presence of God. There's the Aron Kodesh, there's the Siddur, there's a candle burning, there's the sign of Shivisi. All these are furniture. But to whom am I talking? So now, Ribono Shel Olam, I'm talking to you. That you put the words into my mouth and the vibrations that I should feel at this moment, so that the people who are tuning into this might be able to feel too. A sense of yirah, which is respect, knowing that I'm being seen and noticed by you. And I don't have to change anything about what I'm doing, because yes, Hineni muchan u'mezumon lekayem mitzvot aseh v'shinantam levanecha. And even though you're not my physical children, kol hamelamed et ben chaveiro Torah ke'ila yelado. And in this way, Ribono Shel Olam, I ask that you should bench all the people who are there, give them every blessing, so that they might be able to get deeply into davening. So that's the sense of nochach penei Hashem. Shifchi kamayim liber, nochach penei Hashem. That song of Reb Shlomo's, to do this in the presence of God. Now, there is another element that happens that's very important, and I'm trying to get it all in so that you will hear it. So if I'm talking fast, you can stop the tape from time to time and have a conversation among yourselves, or to go over it and hear it again and see it again. That has to do with what happens when I enter inner space. Very few people have spent time inside of themselves to be able to know what really happens, how is their mind operating, what's going on in them. So if people who haven't spent any time in inner space are trying to learn Kabbalah or Hasidus, they'll have ideas, they'll have notions, but they won't, the essence of that isn't going to come, because it comes from innering. The Germans have a word when they're talking about remembering, it's called Erinnerung, which means to re-inner it into yourself, what happened before. So it's that innering that's important. So I have to learn to make also the Tzimtzum Harishon, and make a Halal Panui, an empty space in myself, to see who lives there. For instance, I know that inside my space I have a gallery of my inner audience. Somewhere on the side there's a group of people that's my inner board of directors, and they're watching what I'm doing. And now you take up life space, you people who are watching this are taking up life space in me as I'm making space for you in my being, so that we can have this kind of shared conversation. So inner space introspection is important. Once you do that, you can also check out what's happening with your motives and why you're doing what you're doing. That leads me to Kriyat Shema Shalamita and Cheshbon HaNefesh. I can go through a day and ask myself, what did I do during that day? What was my intent? Was I happy about what I did? Because if I don't steer my life to some extent, I'm also going to be in trouble. I do have to steer my behavior. So if I can't look at the log of what I did the day before, I won't be able to correct it. So this is what inner space, accessing inner space is about, and why it's so necessary. What I said to you before about the issue of having those points, or the different kind of zechirot, to contemplate, it also has an additional value, and that goes like this. If you have a computer, and sometimes you are on the internet, and a virus comes on, and your virus detector jumps right out and says, alert, 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 quarantine that situation, and so on and so forth. You call that a memory resident program. Now, when I look at the way in which I operate, I have two levels. One level is my is, that's how I really do it all the time. And the other one is my ought, like I claim I am or like I would like to be, and so on and so forth. And where the is, the ought is not. And I realized that just like the king of the Khazars, who had this dream that was kavanatcha ritzuya, aval maasecha einam ritzuyim, which is another way of saying your intent is fine, your ought is a nice ought, but your is doesn't measure up. So how do I get more of my ought into my is? So if it's a computer, it's very easy. I can put it as a memory resident program, so it's always there in the background, and it'll be there when I need it. How do you create memory resident programs in your own being so that the oops comes up before you make the mistake rather than after you make the mistake? And that's why that form of meditation on the values is important. So when you are asking yourself after the davening, what were the action directives that I got today from the Rabbi Shalom? People say to me about the business of my prayers aren't being answered. So I say the trouble is you're hanging up the telephone too soon, So if you can stay for a few minutes after the davening with a pad and pencil if it's a weekday, and take a few notes, and then you see what the action directives are. Then each time you pay attention to those action directives, your habit system begins to shift, and those ought things get into the is memory as memory resident, and that's a very important part. I was telling you on the other tape about what it was like to be in the yeshiva. And I wish that we could have a yeshiva date together. A real good yeshiva date. And learn with a niggin, Shnayim ochazim betalde, ze omer ani v'seo. And you get into the argument and you do it with a niggin, and you find out that instead of talking only on one track, the inflections that you're doing as you're talking adds another track. But not only the inflections, but also the body is going along with this, so there is a very somatic, kinesthetic sense added to the words that you're learning. And so it is also when you're learning Hasidus. And if you were to learn, for instance, Dirshu Adonai ve'uzo bakshu panav tamid. Dirshu Adonai ve'uzo bakshu panav tamid. Do resh, it means to go ahead and to search and search. And then comes the flip as you're doing it with this niggun. Am I searching? When am I searching? How is it that I'm searching? Whom am I searching? Dirshu et Adonai et Yud Hei Vav Hei. Ve'uzo, and the energy that comes from him. So therefore, I ask myself, am I plugged into that energy that comes from Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey? And I find it's not yet there. So what do? Bakshu panav tamid. I go and I ask myself, what is the pnimius? What is the innermost thing? What is it that I want? I don't want to have the covet that I'm talking to God. No, I want you, Ribono Shel Olam. I want you in my life. I want your friendship. I want your closeness. I want your warmth. I want your guidance, Ribono Shel Olam. So if I keep on wanting it this way, Bakshu Panav, and I'll do this Tamid, then it's gonna be that next time I start at Dirshu Adonai Ve'uzo, it'll also be Dirshu Adonai Behimotzao, and you will be able to find God. Now, notice what a difference it made that I went this route with a niggin and so on and so forth. So could you imagine that as we used to do in the yeshiva in Lubavitch, that we would study Chassidus sometimes for an hour and a half, or on Shabbos morning longer, and then I would go to daven. And how could I go fast when I was saying something like Nishmat Kol Chai? I go into my own breath. I go into everything that breathes. I go into my understanding of that the name Yud He Vav He represents breathing. Yud is in breath. He is holding the breath. Yud. Spreading it in all 6 directions, the Vav. Breathing out is He, the other He. And so, when I can get into this place and do this while I'm davening Nishmat, and I see how everything breathes, everyone breathes. Life demands that there should be something going on in which we are burning energy and get consciousness and Nishmat Kol Chai. And I see how well you set it up as Tevarech et Shimcha Ya Eloheinu. Veruach Kol Basar, and I feel the aliveness in my flesh. So, can you imagine when you take your time and you work through the Nishmat, one Shabbos, if you can manage that you do nothing else but do the Nishmat that Shabbos, and do it slow, you get a cheshik in what it feels like to daven in be'arichut, to open up, to make space in your davening, to make a spacious davening for yourself. The other thing is also, you have a certain amount of, how would I put it, if you do it right, every time I davened right, the endorphins in my body told me that I did right. I felt good about it. I think I told you that story about how Reb Jacobson banged me on the side and said, have you tried with a smile? I tried with a smile, and all of a sudden the davening opened up. Because it's true that if you daven well, you get juice of that. When I was in yeshiva, I once heard this mashal, and I'll tell it to you too. There's a farmer and his son, and they're coming to New York, and they're going into a restaurant. They made up their mind they're going to have that steak in that restaurant, steak and potatoes. It's the best that it can be. The farmer is ready to treat his son. His son isn't necessarily into steak and potatoes. He loves music. When he shepherds outside, he always plays on his flute. And in that restaurant, there is also an orchestra playing. So the father digs into the steak and says to his son, now I heard it with Yiddish, so I have to tell it with Yiddish. And he says to his son, "Oi, don't be a fool, eat, don't be a behemoth. It's such a mechayeh." And the son looks, Papa, if you could pay attention to this music that's coming in. The music is a mechayeh. A couple of tables away sits a guy, and his food is in front of him. He doesn't pay much attention to it. His nose is in a book, and I hear him go like this, with ahas and oohs and ahs. And the father says to the son, see this stupid guy, his food is getting cold, and he's having his nose in a book. And at this point, the father says, the steak is a mechayeh, and the son says, the music is a mechayeh. But if you were to ask this man, he would say, oh, Spinoza is such a mechayeh. Oh, how I understand him, because he's in another world. Then the three of them are going out and they're bending around the corner, and there's a shul there, and through the window they're looking in. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Shabbos, and there's a guy standing there in davening, deep, deep in the davening. And what happens to him? He says, "Ve'yato mechaya is kulov," and to him the Rabbeinu Shalom is mechaya. So that sense of feeling the joy in what you're doing, the simcha shel mitzvah, bo lefano birnono, that has to be incorporated in the way in which you think about davening. A couple of more things that I have to bring up here, and I can't even read my own writing here. Something has to do with davening. Yes, Reb Nachman says, what's the problem that our prayers are not rising up? He says, because they don't have any chen. Now, on the one hand, I could say, so how do I make chen? But if you pay attention in Yiddish, there's a way in which you say, macht chen dalach. Macht chen dalach. He makes little chens. A smile, a come hither look, a wanting, going into Oter Yisrael b'tifara. Let me go into all my beauty and to shine as much as I can. And in this way, I want to speak to you, Rabbeinu Shalom. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam. And what happens then is that I'm making my chendale to the Rabbeinu Shalom, and I can feel inside the joy that I have in praising someone whom I love, and that gives me that, how would I say, the satisfaction circuit that the Rabbeinu Shalom has built in to the body, which is Hatov V'Hametiv circuit, that gives me the endorphins that says, you're okay, you're right on. I feel right now endorphins sharing this kind of stuff with you, being right on with you. Now, I started to tell you about Professor Thurman, and I didn't tell you the whole story, so let me tell you the whole story. It's wonderful. I used to live in New Bedford at that time, and led a congregation and had to teach Hebrew school every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But I wanted to get my master's degree at Boston University, so I had to leave about 5 o'clock in the morning. They didn't have the fast road yet to get to Bay State Road, where Boston University was, by 7. So at 7, I would have a chance to daven, because I would leave too early. I couldn't daven before. So I would daven, and then I had my sandwich that I took along to eat. The question was, where was I going to go and daven? Hillel House was closed at that time, and I didn't have an inn to the people there. So I looked around. There was only one place that was open. It was a chapel, the big chapel that stands in the middle of the two great buildings of Boston University. So I go up to the big chapel and look around. It's not a place where I can daven. 4 big wooden evangelists there, it's HaBaD Hasidism. I can't do it. But I go downstairs into the vestry there, and there I find there's a little chapel there. And it's a wonderful little chapel, but what can I do? A big cross on top, a big brass cross. Also not. So I go to the next room, and that was called the Daniel Marsh Memorabilia room. He was the chancellor of Boston University, and all kinds of things that he had gotten as signs of honor were hanging in that room. So I didn't have an HaBaD Hasidism there. And I found a little window that went to Mizrach, and that's where I started daven. One day, a guy comes by, a black guy comes by, and I don't know who he is, but he asked me, do you come here every day? And I told him that 3 days a week I would come there. And he says, is there a reason why you don't use the chapel? And I start saying, there are symbols there, I'm trying to be polite. So he says, why don't you try tomorrow? So I was quite eager to come and figure what a nice person that janitor is, because that's what I thought he was. And come by there the next morning, and I find the cross on the side, on the floor, and the Bible is open to Psalm 139, which says, "Whither shall I flee from thy presence, O Lord?" So I had such a good davening there that morning. And I'm finished, and I take the cross and put it back on there. Now I knew that I had the right to remove the cross when I needed to. And I opened up the Psalms to Psalm 100, Mizmor Litodah, a Thanksgiving psalm. So when he comes by, he could see that I was happy to have that. Still didn't know who that person was, and I have to make up my mind which courses to take the next semester. And I see a course being given by the dean of the chapel, Howard Thurman, and this is a course with labs. Now, I was so excited about that. Spiritual disciplines and resources with labs. So, in which course in humanities have you got labs? And in religion, I was so excited about it. But in those days, still very much card-carrying HaBaD, a Lubavitcher person. How could I allow myself to go into the hands of a Christian minister who will want to convert me, and I'll open up my neshama in a lab, and that's not so happy. So I call up and make an appointment. I want to talk to him about whether I should take it or not. I come in, and there sits the guy I thought was the janitor. It is Professor Thurman, the dean of the chapel. He gives me a smile, gives me a mug of coffee, and asks me, well, what can I do for you? And I say, Dean, I'd like to take your course, especially because of the labs. And I come with some things that I've learned in my past, in my training, and I really would like to learn from you, but I don't know if my anchor chains are long enough. I still want to be anchored in Yiddishkeit, but I didn't say that. He understood. So this part of the hand was very dark, and this part was sort of pink, and he goes like this, and like this, and like this, and like this, looks it over and over. Must have been 5 minutes. For me, it was an eternity, waiting for him to answer. And he looks at me and he says, don't you trust the Ruach HaKodesh? He said it in Hebrew. I started to shake, and I put down the mug, and I said, I gotta go. Can you imagine how hard it was for me for weeks, 2-3 weeks afterwards, working this one through? Will I trust the Ruach HaKodesh, or do I have to go by a book or by what other people are going to tell me I should do? Because if I would have asked my mashpiyim in Lubavitch, they would have said, what, you're going to go chochma bagoyim tamin, Torah bagoyim al tamin, what are you doing? And go to a, and they would have said some other things about to a Schwarze Goy or something like that. But it was a very much a God wrestling that I had to do at that time. And I came back to him and said, I will trust. And he says, join. So here it happens that the first session we have, and he reads us this Psalm, 139 again, and it was his favorite. Look it up, and I've done in my Tehillim a pretty good translation of that. And he reads that to us and has us meditate on it, and while he did, he put some music on. Beautiful music, a piece by Bach. Thank God I didn't know what the title of it was, because otherwise I would have freaked. Jesus, the Joy of My Desire. But the second, the second disc drops on the changer, and on comes Kol Nidre by Bruch. which was his way of saying to me, Zalman, relax, you're in a good place, we aren't going to try and do bad things for you. I'm so grateful to this person, let him have a lichtigen Gan Eden. He was also somebody who mentored Martin Luther King and was an amazing human being. While I was in the course, I gave him a siddur. In those days, the only siddurim that had sort of halfway decent translation for then, was the Birnbaum siddur. Since I was using that in my congregation, and it's a horrible siddur, because when I was doing the Friday night service, my line was always, "Thou hast," thou hast raised up my horn like a wild ox. It was my so a silly translation for Vatarim Kerom Kireim Karni. And so at any rate, I gave him that siddur so that he could see what I'm doing, Shachas, Mincha, Maariv, and so on and so forth. I come to visit him later on. Whenever I was in Boston, I came to see him because I really loved him very much. And he was glad to see me too. So he says, when I go to Roland Gittelson, who was the Reform rabbi in Boston, he invites me to preach, and he puts me on there at the end of the service, just before they go down and have some tea. It's such a wrong place about that. So I said to him, let me show you where it really belongs. And I wanted to show him the hiatus between Kabbalat Shabbat and Maariv, and in between there is a saddle. And that Ashkenazim do Bamem Adlikim, and Chassidim do the Shtikele Zohar, Kegavna Di'inim Mit Yachtud Le'ela. And I wanted to show him that in the siddur, so he should be able to say to Gittelson next time, after the first few hymns, let me give the sermon, because he was saying, what's the use of doing the sermon at the end when all you can do is take what I put into the sermon and put it into the tea? I'd much rather. There's still some time to pray. And I want to suggest that to you too, that when you are with your kahal, you put the Dvar Torah pretty early rather than late. Okay. So at any rate, ask him for the siddur so I can show it to him. He says, I'm sorry, I don't have it anymore. So I said, what happened? He says, there was a Jewish lad who came to see me. And he said, Dr. Thurman, I want to convert to Christianity. I've been to your service and the sermons, and I want to convert to Christianity. And I said to him, you're Jewish, aren't you? And he said, yes. So I said, well, first you have to be a Jew, and then if you still want to convert, then come back to me. So he says, how do I become a Jew better? He says, I don't know either. But here's a book that one of my students lent me, and he gives him the siddur. And he says, what should I do with it? He says, read through the whole thing from the beginning to the end, but do it every day for 20 minutes and make it the same 20 minutes in the day when you do that. And then he goes over to the files and pulls out the letter and shows me that he wrote to him. Oh yeah, and he also said, if you find, for the next few weeks I don't want you to come and see me. And if you find to the services, and if you find your home there, then I'll be very happy. So good. So he did it and pulls out the letter and shows that this young man had gotten to the place where he conducted the seder for his mishpacha from that. So that's my Thurman story. Another part of the Thurman story. While I was in Winnipeg, I invited him once to come and speak at various places, and I want to show him around to this place, that place. He's not interested in seeing the buildings, the Eitzim V'Avonim. So I asked him, what would you like to see? And I had a connection with the Trappist monks. He said, I'd like to go out to the Trappist monastery. Would you like to see the abbot? And he said, no, the abbot is sort of the manager of the place. I'd like to talk to the master of novices. So I call up, when we come to see him, Father Franciscus is the guy who's a master of novices, and the two of them start talking, and Thurman asks him, tell me, what are the complaints that the novices have, that the postulants have? And he says, they always complain that it's so hard to come at 2:30 in the morning, prostrate on the floor, this was before Vatican II, participate in the chanting of the Psalms, the offices of Matins and Lauds, and then, and nothing happens for them while they do that. And then they go out in the field, in the middle of the field, they have an ecstasy, they feel glorious, and they say, what do we have to come to the services for? Because they don't do anything for us. So Thurman says, so what do you tell them to do? He says, I tell them they cannot come to any more services except the services of obligation, once a week to Mass, and if it's a particular holiday, but other than that, they mustn't come. So what happens, he says, after a few weeks they start complaining and said, listen, I didn't come to the monastery to be a farmhand, because they do ora et labora, they daven and they are out in the farm, didn't come to be a farmhand. So then he says, I'm able to show them that what they sow in tears at that night when nothing seems to happen pays off when they're in the field, because the stuff in the field has dried up for them too, the fact that they didn't have that process at night. So he was very happy, Howard, to have had that conversation. I want to tell you a little bit more about, I think we have about 15 more minutes left. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the work that we did with I Vow. When Arthur had this conference, Arthur Waska had the conference at the 10th yard site of Buber, I presented there a lab on I Vowing. I didn't want to do a paper or talk about the meaning of Buber for our time or stuff like that. And he says, I vow, so how do you I vow? So that's how we got to everything that we do in dyads. Now, that's not so easily demonstrated in a way in which we are talking here, but here are a couple of things I want to suggest. One of them is one person reads one paragraph and the other one, and reads it slow, and the other one in the pair listens and does the video and the filio to that. And then you switch around and read slowly. Another one is you just stand there and look at each other and recognize that in the other there is God. So you look at the other, past the eyes, past the personality, into the place that is God, and you open up for yourself too, that the one who faces you can look through you and access the God within you. Now that's the kind of thing that is without words. Another one is you put on some very beautiful slow music and put your hands together and you move and you dance according to the music. That's to say, you don't move and your friend doesn't move, but the music begins to move you, and you will see what that feels like. Then there is another one thing that you can try, in which that I call the I Vow Dialog. One of you begins a sentence and doesn't finish the sentence and stops mid-sentence, and the other one finishes it, and then the other person begins a sentence and you finish it, and you do this back and forth. So you take a theme, for instance. The best way to place myself in the presence of God is, and the other one answers. And you don't know what they're going to answer, and you don't know what the next sentence they're going to start. So this is not a thing that you can program. You have to be very much in the here and now. And that's a very important practice to help also with the davening. Now, I felt this was very important to get things out of that solipsistic, everything in the daven is happening inside of me or in my inner space. So I was pointing out to people, when I asked them, what do you do, what's your spiritual trip? And they would tell me a bissel Tai Chi, a bissel yoga, a bissel that, and a bissel meditation. And I ask them, how often do you do it? And they say, well, problem. I have to spend time with my quality time with the family. Don't have that much time. Then I say, how much quality time do you spend with the family? And they tell me, well, I'm not really together enough. So I say, why don't you do this together with each other? So some of these things that I'm suggesting are in order to socialize the inner life, to socialize the meditation, to get to a place of spiritual intimacy with another being. And that exercise that I told you before, looking into the eyes of the other, trying to reach God. Sometimes it's very hard to talk to God when there's no one else there and you're standing in front of the wall davening Shemoneh Esrei. And sometimes your heart breaks and you have to say something to God, and it feels you need to be able to talk to God stronger. So can you imagine if I were to come over to you someday and say, would you do me a favor? I need to talk to God. It's hard for me to talk to God within me, but I can easier talk to the God within you. Could you put your ego aside for 5 minutes so I can talk to God? Can you understand what kind of a thing that can be the experience of being the one to let the other one through is also wondrous. The other thing is setting up the God space in your house is important. You have to have a God's corner. That's where you put your shiviti, that's where you put your candles, that's where you have some incense. That should be your makom kavua at home. So when you walk by that place, it wants you. And if you can spend dawn and dusk time, that's the most wonderful time at that place. And then as Howard Thurman was saying, I don't know what you do, but spend 20 minutes doing that with the book. I think your neshama is going to guide you as to what to do. But ritual setting up of a place and ritual washing of hands and face and so on and so forth. Muslims are very, very machmir on this, washing all the openings of the body and hands and feet. Yeah. So that creates the setting. But besides the setting, as I was talking to you before, that being Da lifnei mi ata omed, that is the set. I am now going to have a wonderful privilege as a creature to address my Creator. And I want to do this with all my fullness. Beha'ir lev v'sum seichel. I want my heart to be awake. I want my mind to be open and awakened too. And with that, I want to daven. So we are coming in for a landing. The thing then is, the best way in which you can learn daven is from a real davener. Because when that other person is in their vibratory place, I was telling somebody the other day about how much I learned from being with Reb Gedalia Koenig. He was a Braslav Chassid in Yerushalayim, was a remarkable holy soul, friendly, warm, not pretentious. And whenever I came to visit him, whatever we did, I so wanted, I placed myself in a receptive mode, which meant that I wanted to become concave where he was convex. I wanted to receive what he had to say. So I took my vibes and attuned to his vibes. Now, that's not something that you can give words to. It's like bioenergetics, it's like getting into the vibes of the other person. But that's how I learned davening, getting into the vibes of my Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch, when he was, and you have that on that DVD, it is an amazing thing. So sometimes when I, as it were, not only put on the tallis, but I also put on the Rebbe. So in my biocomputer, I boot up Rebbe, and that really is very helpful too. Of course, putting some money into a pushkefot stocke beforehand is always a very important thing. Because when you say the words, Harini mikabla lai, mitzvos ve'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, that's so wonderful to be able to do that, to enter into that place. The whole world is worthy of being blessed. And I will be shliach tzibur for myself and for the whole world at this point. So you do this with a certain level of generosity. And doing it with a nigun and having the right ritual and setting up the place is important. But let me just say a word when we come to the end. Just as we are coming to the end of this tape, when you're finished with your davening, don't run away, don't hang up the phone. Just sit a little bit quiet there and do a moment of thanksgiving, saying, "Thank you, Rabbi Shalom. I'm glad that you were here with me. It was such a privilege to be with you. And so I'm saying to you, thank you, good people, for listening in, because it gives me an opportunity to upload to you some of what life has taught me about how to dance with the Rabbi Shalom and how to daven. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon."